Now we need to add some rotation. And we're going to do this by implementing a gesture using fingers, the touch gesture for mobile. So let's go ahead and open our script, camera, follow, and rotate. We're going to open that up in MonoDevelop. And we're going to go ahead and add some things. So the first thing I want to do, like we had set camera, I want to create a setup gesture. So this is a function that will help us set up our gesture when we start the game. And in start, we're going to set the camera, and then we're also going to say setup gesture. So we're going to call it. So when the game starts, it's going to set the camera, and then we're going to set up our gesture. Now, to do this, we're going to need some code. First thing is namespaces. We're going to need to have using, let's give it its own line, using digital Ruby shared. Now, this is a namespace, and actually I would advise you to use namespaces even for your own work. And if you did all of your custom scripts and you put them in your own namespace, then you know that it will not conflict with any other shared package. Now, many of the most reputable asset store providers, like we have here with Digital Ruby, they use their own namespaces. And with those namespaces, if there's a shared name, if there's something like, I don't know, you shouldn't be all sharing names, but, you know, setup or game manager or init or something like that, then it will be hidden in the appropriate namespace, and you'll be able to control that. One of the typical things that for setting up a namespace you can use is, company name, game name, and that there'll be very small chance that anyone else will exactly have what you have. If that looks a little bit too technical, then company name and game name also works nice. That's usually what I use. But namespaces are good for keeping code sorted and organized, and we can see that Digital Ruby has done that with their code. We'll see that further on with some of the other code packages as well. So now that we have our Digital Ruby shared namespace, let's go ahead and use some of the code that's within it. One of the things we need to get started is a private, and it's called a rotate gesture recognizer. And this is code that comes from Digital Ruby and comes from the fingers package. And as we read, looking at their notes, the summary is it's a rotate gesture that uses 2 touches to call back rotation angles as the 2 touches twist around a central point. Now, we could have used a swipe or 2-finger swipe for this, but I also wanted to show some of the more potentially exotic finger swipes or finger gestures that Fingers has. So we're going to go ahead and use a rotate gesture. This is similar to the type of gesture you'd use to say rotate an image in an image editing program on a touch device. So our rotate gesture recognizer, let's just call this rotate gesture. And in our setup gesture, let's say our rotate gesture is equal to a new rotate gesture recognizer. All right, perfect. We're going to be using delegates here, and so we'll need to establish a callback. We'll need to establish a function that gets called when the event is raised. So let's go ahead and create a void rotate gesture callback. And the parameter list here is, now this is all material that comes from Fingers. We don't really need to worry about these. It's all just sort of, it will work out of the box, but we need to have a gesture recognizer, and we'll just call that our gesture. And we also need to have an I collection of gesture touches, which we're going to call touches. Oops, we don't need that. There we go. Just an I collection of gesture touches called touches. Now in setup gesture, we're going to need to do something when that rotate gesture is updated. So let's have a rotate gesture.updated. So when we have a rotate gesture updated, it's a delegate. We're raising an event here, and so here is where we want to add our rotate gesture callback. When Fingers is managing our gestures, it has a managing object that we need to have in the scene to handle our gestures. Now, this is a simple singleton script, so it can be identified or found by its instance. We'll go ahead and set that up when we come back to Unity, but we need to address it here. So we want to have fingerscript.instance .add gesture, and what do we want to add? Our rotate gesture. So we're just simply adding our gesture to the finger script instance. We're registering a gesture with fingers, essentially, and when that gesture is performed, it will execute the code in our callback. So let's go ahead and write the code in our callback, our wonderfully empty rotate gesture callback. So what we want to say is if what? If our gesture state, is the same as gesture recognizer state executing. So essentially, if it's doing something, if we're executing, so if that gesture is actually doing what we want it to do, we want to take our transform. So that's the transform of the camera, and we want to rotate around. We want to rotate around something. So what do we want to rotate around? We want to rotate around the target dot position. So that's our Viking, our player character. We want to rotate around the player character. We want to rotate around it on the y-axis, which is the vector 3 dot up. So that's the axis that we want to rotate on. And then how much do we want to rotate around? We want to rotate, we want to have a rotation gesture. So we want to find our rotation gesture, and then we want to find our rotation degrees delta. And then we want to multiply that by our camera rotation speed. Now we haven't set that up, so that's going to be another public float, similar to our camera follow speed. So we want to have a public float and then camera rotation speed. And let's make that also equal to 1.0 f. So again, so there's just some value in here that's greater than 0. So we will adjust that to taste when we get into the game, but we might as well have something that's non-zero. So then let's go ahead and do this by our camera rotation speed. And then underneath, once we've done all of this, our set camera. So essentially, when we do our rotate gesture callback, we also want to be setting the camera because we're going to be rotating the camera. We're going to need a new offset. So we want to be able to go ahead and look at the target and set our new offset based on our rotation. So let's go ahead and save that. And we're going to come back to Unity. The first thing we want to do is add our finger script prefab. So we can do that by searching, and we also want to search by type. So we want a T colon prefab, or we could do it this way. We can also just come to the search by type and just select prefab. It'll type that in for us. T prefab, we can see that. And then what we're looking for is finger, and we can find finger script, and we can just simply drag that into our game. Oh my goodness, I already have one in there. How embarrassing. All right, well, I had one in from my test, so let's pretend I just did that. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the extra one because I already had one when I was doing my test before the show tonight. So the finger script prefab did not come out after I tested it, so it was already in there. But that's how you find it. You do. We want to find a prefab, and we're looking for finger, and that gives us the finger script prefab down here in the fingers package. So let's go ahead and look at this finger script prefab. This is a singleton, so we can just simply find it by looking for its instance when we're looking for scripting. It listens for input gestures in the scene and just generally helps the scripts do what they're supposed to do. One thing that's worth noting is that we can treat the mouse pointer as a finger, which is useful. We can simulate the mouse with touches. We can pass through objects. We can add touch circles. So if you want to track what the finger touches are, you can show touches, which I have turned on here just so that we can see it. So let's hit save, and let's go ahead and enter play mode. And the simulation that's set up for this is we can see those two dots. Those are simulating the fingers. Is shift and rotate. So it's shift and mouse wheel, which is going ahead and rotating. Now I think that's a bit too slow. So I'm going to go ahead and change the speed. So let's go ahead and look at the main camera script. We've got camera, follow, and rotate. And that was at 5. So let's go ahead and change this to 5 as well. That sounds like a good number. So let's hit save and let's hit play. And now not only does the camera follow us here, but we can also, by holding down the shift key, rotate around. So that's pretty cool. I mean, actually, I think we've probably picked a camera position that may be a little bit too low on our initial camera position, but you know, hey, it works. And you can see that the mouse clicks are being simulated with a little dot as well, and we can see our rotation. You can see that those are the pinch that we would have had with the two fingers rotating around to rotate the screen. Now, again, we could have done this in our own code. We could have detected touches and looked at the touch list, but why? My feeling is that we should be focusing on making our games great, and just focusing on our games in some cases hard enough to do when we can't find the time. So I think it's really fantastic that we can come and get a package that can help us quickly speed up our production by simply dropping this in. Within a couple of minutes, we've got some finger gestures working. We don't have to write hours, days, or weeks worth of code and debug it and get it working. It allows us to focus on making our games great. And also with this particular package, full source is available so that if you feel that you need to make adjustments to the way that these touches are implemented, you can go ahead and you can adjust that C# code yourself.